Iran Daily Briefing. Thursday, May 14, 2026. A UK maritime agency says a ship anchored off the east coast of the United Arab Emirates was seized Thursday and was heading toward Iranian territorial waters. The vessel has not been named. Middle East Eye, citing the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Centre, says it had been at anchor about 70 kilometers from Fujairah. That incident now sits alongside a wider Hormuz picture, reported Chinese vessel transits, US-China talks, and continuing claims from Tehran that shipping can move if it coordinates with Iran. Today is Thursday, May 14, 2026. The Strait of Hormuz remains the center of the Iran file. As we covered earlier this week, the reported ceasefire has not ended maritime incidents, shipping restrictions, or damage reports. Today's reporting adds three pieces to that picture. First, a new reported seizure off the UAE coast. Second, a diplomatic track involving Washington, Beijing, and Tehran. Third, Iran's effort to frame maritime access as conditional on coordination with its own naval forces. There is also a China-specific thread. Iran has begun allowing some Chinese vessels to transit the Strait of Hormuz, according to Fars, citing an informed source, as reported by Reuters via Al Monitor. Fars says those transits followed an understanding over Iranian management protocols for the waterway. That sourcing chain matters. This is not a broad, independently confirmed reopening. In today's briefing, the maritime incident off Fujairah, the US-China-Iran diplomatic track, Iranian accusations against the UAE, and a brief look at domestic and economic spillovers. The top story is the Strait of Hormuz. France 24 reports that a UK maritime agency said Thursday a ship anchored off the east coast of the United Arab Emirates had been seized and was heading toward Iranian territorial waters. The agency did not name the vessel. Middle East Eye, also citing the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Centre, says the vessel reported being at anchor about 70 kilometers from Fujairah when it was seized. That is the clearest new maritime incident in today's intelligence packet. It comes as Iran is trying to present a different message about the waterway. Middle East Eye reports that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Thursday that the Strait of Hormuz is open to all commercial ships if they coordinate with Iran's naval forces. That is not a full unconditional opening. It is a statement that access depends on coordination with Iranian naval forces. A second strand concerns Chinese shipping. Al Monitor, carrying Reuters reporting, says Iran has begun allowing some Chinese vessels to transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Reuters attributes that report to Iran's semi-official Fars news agency, which cited an informed source. Fars said the reported transit followed an understanding over Iranian management protocols for the waterway, so the best formulation is narrow. According to Fars, citing an informed source, as reported by Reuters via Al Monitor, Iran has allowed some Chinese vessels through Hormuz after an understanding over Iranian management protocols. That is important because it intersects with the Washington-Beijing track. Al Monitor, again carrying Reuters reporting, says Donald Trump and Xi Jinping agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must be opened for the free flow of energy. Reuters also reported that Trump was expected to ask China to help end the Iran war during discussions with Xi in Beijing on Thursday. Al Jazeera reports that Iran was among the issues straining US-China ties during Trump's visit to Beijing for talks with Xi. Iranian officials, meanwhile, rejected suggestions that US pressure could weaken Iran-China ties ahead of Trump's arrival in Beijing, according to Iran International. So the diplomatic picture is mixed. Washington is looking to Beijing as a possible lever on Tehran. Beijing is tied to the Hormuz issue because of Chinese shipping. Tehran is signaling that Chinese vessels may move under Iranian-defined rules. There is also a Gulf diplomatic layer. Iran International reports that Araghchi accused the United Arab Emirates on Thursday of direct involvement in military operations against Iran. Middle East Eye, citing Mehr news agency, reports that Araghchi made that accusation during a BRICS foreign ministers meeting in New Delhi. Iran International also reports that Iran sought to rally BRICS countries against US and Israeli military action at that meeting. Those Iranian accusations sit beside reporting on Israeli and Emirati contacts. The BBC and Iran Wire report that Israel confirmed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu secretly visited the United Arab Emirates during the war with Iran. The BBC also reports that the United Arab Emirates denied reports of Netanyahu's alleged visit and said its relations with Israel were not based on unofficial arrangements. GlobalSecurity.org reports that the Israeli Prime Minister's office announced on May 13th that Netanyahu had secretly traveled to the UAE during the US-Israeli war with Iran. Separately, GlobalSecurity.org says Iran's Press TV reported on May 13th that Mossad's chief secretly traveled to the United Arab Emirates at least twice in recent months to coordinate military attacks against Iran. This is an Iranian state-linked media claim, and today's packet includes no confirmation from Israel, the UAE, or an independent outlet. That distinction matters. There is reporting that Israel acknowledged a Netanyahu visit. There is also a separate Iranian state-linked claim about Mossad coordination. Those are not the same evidentiary category. Now, the unresolved issue from previous episodes. GlobalSecurity.org says Iran Press TV reported on May 13th that a ceasefire in the US-Israeli war imposed on Iran had gone into effect 5 weeks earlier. But we are still not seeing a source in today's reporting that reconciles claims of a ceasefire with continuing maritime incidents and damage reports. That contradiction remains unresolved. Today's reporting also does not resolve the substance of Iran's diplomatic counterproposal. As we noted yesterday, Trump had called Iran's counterproposal totally unacceptable. No source in today's packet published the substance of that counterproposal. The substance remains unknown. There are several other single-source claims in the Hormuz file that require careful handling. GlobalSecurity.org, citing US intelligence and separate Sputnik reporting, says Iran has regained access to 30 of 33 launch sites. This remains single source in today's packet. Because yesterday's episode already covered Iran's missile site story, and today's packet does not establish a concrete new development beyond that, we are not treating it as a new lead item. GlobalSecurity.org also reports that US Central Command announced on May 13th that 15 ships carrying humanitarian aid had been allowed through a US naval blockade of Iranian ports. That is not corroborated elsewhere in today's intelligence packet. And GlobalSecurity.org reports that Iran's army said on May 13th that Iran would no longer allow US weaponry to transit the Strait of Hormuz into regional bases. Taken together, today's maritime reporting points to a waterway governed less by a clear ceasefire and more by contested access rules. Tehran says commercial ships can move if they coordinate with Iran's naval forces. Fars says some Chinese vessels are being allowed through under an understanding over Iranian management protocols, as reported by Reuters via Al Monitor. At the same time, a UK maritime agency says a vessel off the UAE coast was seized and was heading toward Iranian territorial waters. The concrete thing to watch next is whether the UK Maritime Agency, the UAE, Iran, or the ship's operator identifies the seized vessel and clarifies who controls it now. Story 1. Washington says there is progress in talks with Iran, but the content is still unclear. Al Jazeera reports that US Vice President J.D. Vance said progress was being made in talks with Iran. GlobalSecurity.org also reports that Vance announced on May 13th that Washington believed progress had been made in negotiations with Iran. That is the public US signal, but today's reporting does not provide the terms under discussion. It also does not disclose the substance of Iran's counterproposal that Trump previously called totally unacceptable. So the diplomatic file has movement in tone, but not yet in text. The China track is part of this. Al Jazeera says Iran was among the issues straining US-China ties during Trump's visit to Beijing for talks with Xi. Al Monitor, carrying Reuters, says Trump and Xi agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must be opened for the free flow of energy. Iran International reports that Iranian officials rejected suggestions that US pressure could weaken Iran-China ties ahead of Trump's arrival in Beijing. The thing to watch is whether any government publishes an on-the-record description of what progress in US-Iran talks means, or whether the next update remains limited to general language. Story 2. Iran and Kuwait are trading accusations over 4 detained Iranians, Mehr News Agency and Global Security. ORG report that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi condemned Kuwait's detention of 4 Iranian nationals who were sailing on a boat in the Persian Gulf. RT reports that Kuwait accused Iran of attempting to infiltrate Bubiyan Island. RT also reports that Kuwaiti authorities arrested 4 men suspected of belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Those are sharply different framings. Tehran presents the case as the detention of Iranian nationals on a boat. RT's account of the Kuwaiti position presents it as a suspected the IRGC-linked infiltration attempt. Today's packet does not include a detailed Kuwaiti official statement, nor does it include evidence presented by either side. The thing to watch is whether Kuwait releases formal charges, identities, or evidence, and whether Iran escalates the matter through diplomatic channels. Story 3. South Korea is still examining the May 4th attack on the HMM Namu. Al Monitor reports that Yonhap said South Korea is analyzing US shared intelligence on the May 4th attack against the HMM Namu vessel. Al Monitor also reports that a senior South Korean official quoted by Yonhap said the possibility that an entity other than Iran was responsible for the attack is low. This is a follow-up to a thread regular listeners have been tracking since last week. The new element is the South Korean review of US shared intelligence and the reported assessment from a senior South Korean official. The thing to watch is whether Seoul moves from analysis to a formal attribution and whether that attribution is issued by the government rather than through quoted officials. Story 4. Iran's domestic pressure picture includes new claims about January violence and continuing internet disruption. Iran International reports that security forces in Najafabad in Isfahan province implemented deliberate power outages on January 8th and 9th. The outlet says those outages were used to facilitate a lethal crackdown on protesters. Iran International also reports that Parham Mehrabi, 18, was killed in Mashhad on January 8, 2026, citing sources familiar with the matter. The same outlet says those sources reported that security forces killed him with direct fire. In another item, Iran International reports that Al-Ghadir Hospital in East Tehran had a 5-body morgue that was overflowing during what Iran International describes as the January crackdown. These are serious claims, but they come from one outlet in today's packet. No Iranian official response is included in the material provided today. Separately, Al Monitor reports that millions of Iranians have been unable to access the internet since the United States and Israel attacked Iran on February 28th. The thing to watch is whether rights groups, Iranian officials, or additional media outlets publish corroborating information on the January violence, or whether the reporting remains confined to Iran International's sources. A brief economic note before we move on. Al Jazeera reports that the United Nations warned disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz could drive up food costs. Al Jazeera also reports that Japanese snackmaker Calbee said it would temporarily use only black and white colors on 14 products because of a lack of printing ink linked to the Iran war. France 24 reports that soaring fuel costs due to the Iran war are leading consumers in Asia toward rooftop solar power, and that this shift could benefit China as the world's largest provider of solar technology. These are not central military developments, but they show how the war and shipping disruptions are reaching consumer prices, packaging supply chains, and energy choices. The thing to watch is whether UN agencies or major companies issue further specific warnings tied to Hormuz disruptions. Finally, a short cultural note. Al Jazeera reports that thousands cheered Iran's national football team, Team Melli, at a public send-off in Tehran. Al Monitor says videos aired on Iranian state TV showed the team being presented on a stage in Tehran's Engelab Square. Mehr News Agency and IRNA report that President Masoud Pezeshkian visited the team camp before departure for the World Cup. Al Jazeera also reports that Iran's World Cup kit was unveiled before the team's training camp in Turkey. The thing to watch is whether state media continues to elevate the football team as a national unity story during the war. The fuller picture behind the cold open is this. A UK maritime agency said Thursday that an unnamed ship anchored off the east coast of the United Arab Emirates had been seized and was heading toward Iranian territorial waters, according to France 24. Middle East Eye reports that the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Centre said the vessel had been at anchor about 70 kilometers from Fujairah when it was seized. The vessel is not named in today's reporting. At the same time, Iran is saying the Strait of Hormuz is open to commercial ships if they coordinate with Iran's naval forces, according to Middle East Eye. And some Chinese vessels are reportedly being allowed through Hormuz, according to FARS, citing an informed source, as reported by Reuters via Al Monitor. FARS said that followed an understanding over Iranian management protocols for the waterway. Those are the facts in today's packet. A reported seizure near Fujairah, no vessel name yet, an Iranian statement on coordinated commercial passage, and a narrowly sourced report of some Chinese transits under Iranian management protocols. In the next 24 to 48 hours, watch 4 items. First, the seized vessel off the UAE coast. France 24 reports that a UK maritime agency said the ship was seized and heading toward Iranian territorial waters. The agency did not name it. Middle East Eye reports that the vessel had been anchored about 70 kilometers from Fujairah. Watch for identification of the vessel, its operator, its flag, and any statement from Iran, the UAE, or the UK Maritime Agency. Second, the Hormuz access rules. Middle East Eye reports that Ahragchi said the Strait of Hormuz is open to all commercial ships if they coordinate with Iran's naval forces. Al Monitor, carrying Reuters, reports that some Chinese vessels have been allowed through, according to FARS, citing an informed source after an understanding over Iranian management protocols. Watch for whether this remains limited to some Chinese vessels or whether any source reports broader commercial access under similar coordination rules. Third, the US-China readout on Iran. Al Monitor, carrying Reuters, says Trump and Xi agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must be open for the free flow of energy. Reuters also reported that Trump was expected to ask China to help end the Iran war during discussions with Xi in Beijing on Thursday. Al Jazeera reports that Iran was among the issues straining US-China ties during the visit. Watch for any further official statement from Washington or Beijing that describes what role China may play on the Iran file. Fourth, the substance of the diplomatic track. Al Jazeera reports that Vice President J.D. Vance said progress was being made in talks with Iran. GlobalSecurity.org reports the same general claim from May 13th. But today's packet does not provide the substance of Iran's counter-proposal that Trump called totally unacceptable. Watch for any text, terms, or official description of what the parties are actually discussing. Today's episode covered the reported seizure of an unnamed vessel near Fujairah, Iran's conditional language on Hormuz access, the China Channel, UAE-related accusations, and the unresolved gaps in the ceasefire and diplomacy tracks. We'll be back tomorrow with the next Iran Daily Briefing. For full written briefs and source-backed updates, check out the Iran Brief on Substack. Paid members can build multi-country monitoring across the countries they care about, with personalized briefings delivered automatically.